theory of coordination compounds has a lot of drawbacks, in the sense there were a lot of assumptions whether it is inner orbital or outer orbital. There is also a no clear cut quantitative calculation possible of the magnetic moments, and this also doesn't say which are weak ligands, which are strong ligands. We say F is a strong ligand, NS3 is a weak ligand, but how do you say they are weak, or how do they say we are strong? There is no scientific background behind it. So to address all these drawbacks of valence bond theory, they have the new theory called crystal field theory. Crystal field theory came into picture. Okay, what is this crystal field theory? You know very well that the d orbitals of the central metal the atom plays a vital role in this coordination complex formation. And you know very well that there are 5 d is having 5 suborbitals, and you know these 5 suborbitals are dxy, dyz, dzx, and then dx square minus y square and dz square. So like we have this px, py, pz, the 5 suborbitals of d shell are dxy, dyz, dzx, ds square minus y square and dz square. You know very well dxy is upon x axis and y axis. This is y and z axis, z and x axis. So there is a set of, already the ligands are donating a pair of electron. Good. And they are there in the d orbitals. And apart from that, the ligands themselves have some electrons. Since the d electrons, d orbitals are very close by compared to the s or p orbitals, and depending upon the ligand, direction of the ligand and the central metal atom, say for example if cobalt is attached to NS3 in a straight way, that is in the same axis of, see this thing here, the number of electrons present in cobalt, the way in the d shells of cobalt, and the NS3 itself has some electrons, there will be electron repulsion. Now, because electrons are like poles, both have negative charges, so there is going to be a electron repulsion. So this electron repulsion will be more pronounced in d square minus y square and dz square. Of the 5 suborbitals, d square minus y square and dz square are in the same axis as of the ligands. Okay, the ligands as well as the central metal atom will be in the same axis if them electrons are occupied in the central metal atom in d square minus y square and dz square. So because of this proximity and they are in the same axis, they are in the same exposure, direct exposure, there is going to be a repulsion, and this repulsion definitely gives more energy. So any electron present in x square minus y square and dz square will definitely have more energy than the electrons present in dxy, dyz, dzx. I hope you are able to understand this clearly. Okay, as per the molecular orbital theory and as per the valence bond theory, all this x, y, y, z, zx, s square minus y square, z square minus dz square, as well as the 4s electrons which are involved and 4p subshells which are involved, they become degenerate. In the sense what? The difference of energies between a d suborbital and a s suborbital or a px, py, pz orbitals are all nullified, so that all the things which are involved in the bonding, all the orbitals which are involved in the bonding are of the same energy. That is what is molecular orbital theory. But then here also the same thing applies. So when they form a compound, okay, so involving d square minus y square, dz square, then the s orbital, p orbital, all should be in the same energy. But then in reality, since s square minus y square, dz square are all directly exposed to the axis of the central metal atom, and they also, both of them have some rich density of electron, and there are repulsions possible because of the electrons. There are deviations, so that the orbitals which are involved in the bonding become degenerate. The degenerate nature, that is the equal nature of the orbitals, are nullified because of this repulsion, which gives higher energy for some and lowers the energy for others. Okay, so the ones which are with the high, which experience the high repulsion, d square minus y square and dz square, they are called Eg, and these electrons in this are called T2g. Okay, so Eg has one set of energy, T2g has another set of energy. I hope you are able to understand this concept very clearly. As per molecular orbital theory, once the bond formation is over, every orbital loses its individual identity. Everything becomes degenerate. In the sense, everything has the same energy. But here, same molecular orbital theory applies here also, but still, because of this proximity of the electrons in dx square minus y square and dz square, there is a repulsion, electron-electron repulsion, which causes the difference in energy, so that the degenerate nature of the molecular orbital theory fails here. Okay, so that the difference in energy is Eg minus T2g. Say, for example, the total involvement is 5, isn't it? 5 orbitals. So if this Eg takes up 3/5 of the total energy, and T2g takes up the 2/5 of the total energy. The total energy is 1, and if you are going to split it among Eg and T2g, the 3 subshells of dxy, yz, dz, these 3 electrons present in these subshells acquire, these 3 subshells acquire 2/5 of the energy, and the 2 subshells of the electrons in the 2, they represent the 3/5 of the energy. So the difference between Eg and T2g, Eg minus, Eg becomes greater than T2g, or Eg minus T2g is delta. That is such a difference in energy. Okay. So because of this difference in the energy, the type of bond formed or this thing, they have difference in the certain characteristics, and the difference in the character results in a weak ligand or a strong ligand. So now coming to what is a weak ligand and a strong ligand, wherever the Eg and T2g energy levels are almost the same, the difference between Eg and T2g is almost not there or very, very, very less, then they are called, such ligands are called weak ligands. The difference in energy between Eg and T2g, if it is very, very less or null, they are called weak ligands. And if the Eg T2g difference is very high, that is delta is more, the value of delta is more, then it is called strong field ligands. So these are all weak field ligands. Now the explanation for weak ligand and strong ligand is there with this crystal field theory. This difference is because of the difference in the energy between Eg to G, and the difference is again because of because of the proximity of the paired electrons causing the repulsion. Okay, I hope you are able to understand. So now, depending upon this thing, say typically now coming back to ammonia. For ammonia, almost the Eg to G difference is not there. So there is no question of any problem in energy. And of course, if the F is there, the Eg to G difference is more. Okay, so now it is like these are occupied by 3 subshells, that is 2 subshells. Now if you take a weak ligand, now depending upon the value of delta and the pairing energy, okay, pairing energy is energy required for pairing of electrons. So if delta is less than P, pairing energy, then they are called weak ligands. And if delta is more than P, they are strong ligands. Okay, what do you mean by delta is less than T? So, where we have said this 1, 2, 3, T x y, T y z, T z, this thing are all in T to G. If this is very, very less, then the fourth also will be T to G and not go to EG. The fourth one, instead of dx square minus y square, dz square is EG. But then, if the difference is not much, T2G 1, 2, 3, instead of 3 suborbitals, it will go to 4. So, T2G and it will go to T2G level. Okay. And of course, even if it is very, very least, even there will be dz square also will not be there. So, that there will be no EG at all will be in T2G. Okay. If the pairing or repulsion is more, definitely minimum of these 2 EG will be there. Okay. So, this is the scientific explanation of all the assumptions or drawbacks or limitations of valence bond theory of coordination compounds. I hope you are able to understand this very clearly, the difference in EG and T2G. Okay. So, if we have any doubts, you can even clarify with me personally. Let us see the color in coordination compounds. Okay, most of the coordination compounds are colored, and this color is because of the ligand getting attached to the central metal atom. Okay, so what is happening, as we have seen, there is a T2G level and a EG level. So when a light is sent, electrons in T2G level are excited to EG level. Once they are excited, and once when they come to, then the one whatever is going up has to come down naturally. They go to the excited stage of EG, then falls back to T2G. So the difference in energy is emitted as color. If you take typically titanium TaS2O 6 times, these are all violet in color. Okay. So this as per crystal field theory, the color of this thing is because of the d transmission, that is from dxyz or dzx to tx square y square minus dz square x or dz square, s square minus y square or dz square, because of the transition from a lower energy lower energy T2G to a higher energy EG. Okay. So this color can be is very unique for a coordination compound, and that two compounds where water is there as the ligand. Typical example or the very classic example is the nickel. So nickel NaH2O 6 times on its own has a color, and if you are going to add ethylene diamine En as getting attached to this, if En is getting attached to NaH2O 6 times, the En forms, En is a stronger ligand, so it forms a complex take out of the 6 H2O, 2 H2Os are taken up by the En, and then because it's a bidentate ligand, this becomes NaH2O 4 times 2H2O. So this is having a pale yellow color. So once again some more En is attached to this, this becomes nickel. This has a different color. So, and then if further addition of En, ethylene diamine, makes it as NiEn 3 times. And this has a different color. So, with 6 H2O molecules, it has a color, maybe violet, then it becomes pale yellow, it is slowly changing in color. So that very clearly it says that the H2O, which is acting as a ligand, is responsible for the color. It's also getting changed with the En. The ligand H2O is getting changed to En, which is responsible for the difference in color. The classical, where whenever you see a crystal like copper sulfate 5H2O, if we know copper sulfate 5H2O is blue in color, and once you heat it up and the water molecules, that 5 water molecules go away, the plain copper sulfate will be white in color. So most of the water molecules which are attached to as ligands, they are responsible for bringing the color to the coordination compounds. Okay, typically copper sulfate 5H2O and copper sulfate, this is blue in color and this is colorless. Okay, this is about the color in coordination compounds, which I said because of the difference and because the energy levels from T to G, it is getting raised to Ig or DD transmission. Now let us see the stability of coordination compounds. Stability of coordination compounds. The stability of the coordination compounds is the degree of association it has with degree of associations with which this has with the different species which are taking part in the equilibrium. Say for example, if it is a metal ion and then a ligand is getting added. So this forms Ml. Okay, so metal plus ligand gives us Ml. The stability of this coordination compounds depends on the degree of association between M and L. Degree of association means one should not leave each other. If two are friends, we two are associated means I will never leave you, you will never leave me. That is a bonding, a thick bonding. And if this is actually, if further ligands are getting added, the stability becomes, so if there is one ligand, M plus L gives Ml. So what is the equilibrium constant for this reaction? This will be K1. Okay, K1 is, of course you know very well, concentration of Ml divided by concentration of M into concentration of L. This is the equilibrium constant. So similarly, for K2, it is Ml2 by Ml into L. So the second ligand is getting added. So and then if you take the third, Ml2 plus L gives Ml3. Then the equilibrium constant K3 for this reaction is concentration of Ml3 by concentration of Ml2 into concentration of L. Okay. So in general, if you take the overall this thing, if you were to sum up M L n minus 1 plus L gives M L n. So if this 3 should be 2 here, so where n is the number of ligands. So if you take, as you take this thing, so now when you add up the individual thing, the overall equilibrium constant for this reaction, if you take there are a metal which have 3 ligands, and the overall equilibrium constant beta for such this thing is a sum of K1 plus K2 plus K3. Okay, the overall equilibrium constant beta is a sum of K1 plus K2 plus K3. So definitely that becomes more than either K1 or K2 or K3 individually. Okay, the level of the beta, the overall equilibrium constant, decides the stability of the coordination compounds. More the value of beta, more will be the stability of the coordination compound. What are the uses of coordination compounds? Coordination compounds have a lot of applications or a lot of uses in industry as well as in chemistry. And the first and foremost thing is where we have now seen their property. Copper sulfate is colorless, whereas copper sulfate 5s2o is blue in color. So for the exact qualitative deduction and the quantitative deduction of the metals or quantitative deduction of any chemical compound, coordination chemistry can be used, because the copper sulfate may be made to a coordination complex with this water, which changes the color, and depending upon the quantity of this thing change or this thing, we can also arrive at the presence of copper quantitatively, qualitatively. Not only this, there are, of course, we have seen the titanium ion or other things. So that is one application. So quantitative and qualitative deduction of elements and compounds. Then this is used in, especially where we have seen in the extraction process of metal, where silver and gold are converted to a complex with the cyanide. They form a complex, and so the pure silver or pure gold goes into a complex with the cyanide, and again usual process, the process of removing the cyanide to get the Ag also we have seen. So in extraction of metals like gold and silver and gold. Then even in refining or purification of metals. Either refining or purification of metal. Purification of metal we have seen nickel, that is in Mons process. Nickel is made a carbonyl, nickel carbonyl. Complex is formed, and the nickel carbonyl complex forms at a certain temperature. If you heat it at a higher temperature, pure nickel comes out. So in the purification of metals also this can be used. Then there are a lot of biological reactions which are because of coordination compounds. For example, the chlorophyll contains magnesium. Okay, so magnesium is a central metal atom there, and there is a complex of magnesium. And similarly, hemoglobin contains iron with globulin, no? So there iron, this hemoglobin itself is a coordination compound, and it is very much responsible, for transportation of oxygen from the lungs to the different places of our body. Okay, so in the biological reaction. So now there are many other applications also. Now they say the chelation chemistry. Chelation chemistry is now a growing field in medicine. Okay, and also has a lot of application in dentistry. This is a latest or coming up field in medicine, chelation chemistry. So like this, there are a lot of applications for, and typically even for purification of water. Purification and identification, not for more than purification, it is for identification of hardness of the water. Identification of identification and even estimation also. Identification and estimation of hardness in water. You know very well that we are having water throughout, but whether the water is potable, in the sense drinkable or not, or whether that water can be used for cooking purpose or not, can be decided only by finding out the hardness. And you know very well the hardness of water is present, so due to the presence of calcium and magnesium ions, which are chlorides or sulfates. So, we use sodium EDTA, Na2-EDTA. Sodium EDTA is used for estimation of the hardness. How much of hardness, what is the degree of hardness? In this sodium EDTA is titrated with the water. The calcium and magnesium ions in water, they form a complex with the EDTA of sodium. So, calcium EDTA or magnesium EDTA is formed, and by assessing the quantity of calcium or magnesium EDTA formed, we can identify or estimate the degree of hardness of water. Once you identify the hardness accordingly, to that extent we have to use other process for removing the hardness, so that the hard water becomes soft water and hard water becomes a potable or a drinking water. So these are the broad uses. Of course, there are a lot of other uses also possible.